You guys, we have got a group for you this morning. I am so excited for this conversation that we're going to have as we close out on our final day here at the Campus Compact Conference. And today is about looking towards that horizon. That's been a theme of so much of the remarks, that in this moment of uncertainty and great challenge, we also really need to be doubling down about building the future around where we all are headed and what we can see forward. I have with me 4 incredible individuals, and we are going to focus first on letting them tell their own story versus me reading out very large bios that they each have. And I'm gonna start on my far end and work my way back, and I'm gonna ask each of them to share a small bit about their story. What is their path to civic and community engagement? And we're gonna start with John King, the Chancellor of SUNY, and our 10th Secretary of Education underneath of President Obama. Please, John.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm so happy to be here and so inspired by this morning. So, my journey to service really started with my own experience as a kid growing up. Both my parents were New York City public school educators their whole careers. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. And when I was a kid, school took on this very large role in my life because both my parents passed away when I was little. My mom when I was 8 and my dad when I was 12. And in the period when it was just my dad and me, my dad was struggling with Alzheimer's. Home was incredibly difficult and scary and unstable. And the thing that saved me was great teachers who made school a place that was safe and supportive and nurturing and engaging. And if not for those teachers, I wouldn't be alive today. I wouldn't be sitting here today. And after my dad passed, I moved around different family members, different schools, but it was always teachers who gave me a sense of hope and purpose. And when I got to college, thanks to those teachers, I wasn't sure what my path would be, and I found the Phillips Brooks House at Harvard, the undergraduate public service organization. I know we have some folks from PBH who are here. And I got involved in tutoring and mentoring and working with young people, and I fell in love with trying to do for other young people what teachers had done for me. And so decided to become a teacher, and my whole career in education has always been about trying to create those kinds of spaces of support and care that teachers created for me.
Amazing. Next, we have Tania Mitchell, who's the Professor of Education and the inaugural Associate Provost of Community Engagement at College Park, and one of the most influential scholars in our field. Tania.
Good morning, everyone. I keep telling people to keep mentioning the inaugural part in my title so that people recognize not only that the position is new, but also that I'm new to the university, because I'm learning a lot in this new space of my work. So if Nick Longo is in the room, he's gonna yawn and go to sleep because he's heard this story before. I was the first person in my family to go to college, as many people on the stage and in this room were. And set foot on campus of Baylor University in Waco, Texas, with no idea what it was going to mean for me. I was fortunate to walk into an introduction to political science class where I met Dr. Rick Battistoni. Rick Battistoni gave us an option. He said, you can write this 20-page paper, or you can do 20 hours of service in your local community. Now, everybody knows in this room now that that is not your ideal community engagement experience. But it was mine in that moment. And as someone who was really intimidated by the idea of writing a 20-page paper, which is really funny now if you know that I've now written 4 books. But at the time, writing a 20-page paper felt impossible. And I ended up taking that choice to be in community and met incredible people. And on a predominantly white campus as a Black woman, the community was more home to me than the classroom was. And I wondered from that moment what that might mean for all of us in community engagement if for someone who was minoritized, who was oppressed in the different ways that I was, to understand and think about what that experience could mean. That service, the opportunity to be of and in service, could be a transformative moment for folks. And so that led a pathway with a number of incredible connections and opportunities to people in this room. I'm seeing Andy Furco, who was my mentor and colleague at the University of Minnesota and encouraged me to apply for a job. I'm seeing Laurel Hurt, who embraced me with open arms when I got there. Julie Plout was a co-grad student at Indiana University and helped me think more about this work in this field, and countless other people who have just been role models and inspirations for me in thinking about what it means to do this work from a place of equity, and that is justice seeking.
Thanks, Tania. Next, we have Shira Hoffer, who is a senior at Harvard College and is the founder of the Institute for Multipartisan Education.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Shira, and my journey began my freshman year. It probably began before, but I'll start with my freshman year. I was taking a class, and when we were discussing one unit, how to dismantle the university system. And I was a freshman, and I raised my hand, and I said, I'm really sorry, but can someone first explain to me why we're dismantling the system before we learn how to do so? And the classroom went silent. And everybody stared at me, and I was like, uh-oh. And finally, we just kind of moved on. And afterwards, I went up to the professor. I said, excuse me, I really hope I didn't offend anybody, but what just happened? And she said, we don't ask questions like that in this class. She said, this classroom is meant to be a safe space, and so we don't ask questions like that. And I've been grappling ever since. If someone can tell me later on today how that response relates to this question, I'd really love to hear. But I've been grappling with that ever since. And that kind of set my academic trajectory toward trying to understand speech and inclusion on campus, how people deal with controversial topics, what are kind of the limits of speech. And after the October 7th protests, as you know, on our campus, that was quite a challenge. I trained as a mediator, actually, in small claims court, and took that mediation background and founded the Institute for Multipartisan Education, which works to promote what we call curious disagreement in education. So we run training for middle and high schools, and we have a fellowship for college students. I'd love to talk more about that with you later. And I will, upon my graduation in May, run the Institute for Multipartisan Education full-time as the executive director.
And finally, I'm thrilled to have Emmanuel Gómez with us. Emmanuel is a recent graduate of Pasadena City College. He's a junior at California State University, Long Beach. And he is one of those phenomenal Campus Compact student design fellows that we have had the pleasure of working with the past few years. Emmanuel.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. And first, I want to say what an honor to be sharing space with you all. And thanks for the opportunity. So, as Bobbie mentioned, I am currently studying history at Long Beach. And my journey began when I recognized the need for education. Following high school, I got a warehouse job, and that wasn't fun. Constant shipping and receiving just wasn't my ideal post-high school graduation type of gig. I wanted to be a professional soccer player. But I realized I couldn't do this on a daily basis, so I enrolled into the only college tour campus, or to the only campus I ever had a college tour during high school, and this was a private automotive school. So I had never been exposed to this idea of higher education, and I successfully completed that program. I obtained my certificate, I reached my goal, and I began to live my dream, which was to wrench for my preferred manufacturer, which is General Motors. And as a certified automotive diesel technician, I was living the dream. Unfortunately, it's a labor-intensive job, and I hurt my back. I had a back surgery, and I don't wish that for any young person because it can be mentally draining as well. And I had to pivot. So I had to learn something new that would not cause me to, put an impact or a strain on my back any further. And I enrolled into Pasadena City College, my hometown community college, and from Pasadena, California. I forgot to mention that. I take a lot of pride in that. I believe that is America's city, and it doesn't contain just its stadium. But long story short, I quickly realized the importance of critical thinking, and in the moment that changed my life was, I was arrested for the first time, and I got to endure what police misconduct is. And following that, I didn't know how to navigate that new system. Again, another new system I wasn't aware of. And I was desperate. I found a program on campus that serves students who are formerly incarcerated or system impacted. And when I'm pleading not guilty, I am trying everything to dismiss the case. We don't want to go to trial necessarily, but that's what I'm asking for. Moving forward, I realized that the community college experience is deemed inferior to the 4-year. And I say that because the prosecutor failed to acknowledge that I was in higher ed, community college, but it wasn't enough for them to show and to let the judge know that, hey, this person is working towards something that will ultimately contribute to the greater good. So that changed my life. Since then, I've been trying to just let folks about the importance of community college, specifically in my hometown. And I try to let people know that it is important that we share our perspective and our experiences, because there are many people who might be timid or fearful to be vulnerable. So now I've made that a lifestyle. Of course, I'm studying now, and I have yet to earn my doctorate. And yeah, I plan to continue doing this work and sharing these spaces with people who are inspiring, but more than anything, they're dedicated to this cause.
Thank you, Emmanuel. So next, we're going to ask the big question, which is, as we dream, as we look towards that horizon, as we imagine what is possible, even in this moment of great uncertainty, what does higher education, both at a system level, but also at an individual institution level, what does it look like on its best day going forward? What does it look like when we fully embrace the civic and community engagement mission? I'm going to start again with you, John, and work down, and then we'll just kind of engage in some particular questions for each of you.
Sure. Look, I think the mission of advancing democracy is core to what higher education is supposed to be in this country. And so if that is true, then the work on civics and service has to be infused into everything we do, how we learn and how we live. So for us at SUNY, one of the things we're doing is making civic discourse part of our general education requirements, so that every undergraduate will have academic experiences that support the development of the skills of civic discourse. We've launched a civic discourse fellowship for faculty, so that faculty can provide professional development to their colleagues around how to build those skills into the classroom, so we avoid the situation like Shira was describing, where rather than discouraging tough conversations, we're encouraging those in our classrooms. So that's the how we learn part. On the how we live side, we've launched something called the Empire State Service Corps, 500 SUNY students who are paid for 300 hours a year of public service work, doing tutoring in schools, environmental work, addressing food and housing insecurity, serving as peer mental health counselors. And we are trying to say to all of our campuses, we have 64 in the SUNY system, that service has to be central to how we think about what we do. We've also launched a climate corps, folks who are focused on working in our agencies that do environmental work in the state. We've launched a Veterans Enrollment and Success Corps so that our veteran students have the opportunity to contribute to recruiting and supporting other veteran students. We've launched a FAFSA Completion Corps. April is Financial Aid Month. Encourage everyone in your life to complete the FAFSA. But the free application for federal student aid unlocks access to federal and state support to attend college. At SUNY, more than half of our students go tuition free because of federal and state financial aid. So the FAFSA is crucial for us. And so we've invested in training current students to help prospective students and their families complete the FAFSA. So we're trying to make service fundamental to our culture. And the last thing I'd say is also part of how we live is that we have to participate in our democracy. And that doesn't mean just voting in presidential elections, that means voting and engaging in civic life. And so we've provided grants to our campuses to support nonpartisan civic engagement activity that students are leading, so that we are registering students to vote, but also getting students informed about issues at the local, state, and federal level so that they can truly engage.
Amazing. Tania, as you think about the vision, I also, you've worked with such a variety of campuses over your time and have had influence across the sector. So I'm curious also, as you think about that vision of what higher education can look like when we fully embrace this mission, how do you think that we look at that more as a sectoral approach?
What do you mean by sectoral approach?
That we think about it for the entire sector of higher education. Part of the beauty of Campus Compact is that we have every type of institution represented. So just as I'm wondering, when you think about the vision, how do we all come together around this kind of commitment of civic and community engagement beyond looking at kind of how it can play out in individual institutions?
When I think about, we've gone through all of these iterations of what we call this work. Is it service learning? Is it community engagement? Is it community-based learning? Is it community-engaged learning? Is it community-connected? And I appreciate so much what Dr. Sweet said when she was receiving her award about the work, right? And figuring out what the work is. And the way that I like to describe what we get to do is that we get to leverage the resources and talents of the university to make people's lives better. And so when I think about that piece of it, it's the recognition of where resources lie, but also of where people's passions, desires, interests, and expectations are. And that when we get to do that work, that it is serving not only those of us within higher education institutions who get to learn alongside incredible students, our colleagues that are faculty and staff, and from the communities where we get to work, we get to put our passions to work in service of ourselves and others, but also that we have the opportunity, the space, and the ability to really connect in meaningful ways with our communities, to understand the barriers that have prevented them from being able to thrive in the ways that they deserve and desire to, and then also to figure out what we can do together to make that difference possible. And that if we think about our work as making people's lives better, that the democracy that we're so committed to is advanced through that. Our scholarship is advanced through that. But more importantly than anything, we get the community that we deserve to all be a part of and live in.
Thanks. Shira, you're graduating in May, right?
I am.
Amazing. So when you look out towards the future, what does a higher education system look like on its best day?
Yeah, I'm thinking a lot about core competencies. What do we want students to leave college knowing how to do? And there are some that I think they're quite obvious. Everybody should know how to read. Hopefully nobody's learning how to read in college, right? So things that we want people to be able to do in their lives. We don't want them to know how to read. Often we want them to know how to give presentations. Why do I have so many presentation assignments in my classes? Because society has decided that giving a presentation is a skill that we want people to be able to do. So we want people to know how to talk to people. But we don't often think about the flip side. Don't we want people also to know how to listen to other people, to be able to engage in more of those soft skills of hearing a perspective that we disagree with, reading a book or a paper from a perspective that we feel is completely alien, but being able to give kind of a best argument in favor of that position that we don't agree with. This type of engagement, and I'm so excited to hear about what SUNY's doing with making that something that every student should go through, because I think that if we can invest in that core competency of the ability to engage across differences, then whether your school is trying to reach goals around diversity, equity, and inclusion, trying to reach goals around free speech, any sort of trying to reach goals around putting students into the workforce, any goal that a school has, I think that this skill, really, it's a skill of being able to have these conversations across differences is something that's worth investing in and worth equipping your students with the skills to be able to do. So if I'm thinking about, what do I want to see after the next generation, like 4 years later, I want students to be able to graduate and come to my organization and apply for a job and say, here's why I think that active listening is really important. Here's how I've used it in school, and here's how I've been able to share it with other people. I think if we can create students who are leaving their college experience able to engage with anybody that they meet in any context, be able to say, why do you think that, when they hear something they disagree with, instead of, you're dumb, you're crazy. If they can ask why and really understand why, that doesn't mean they have to agree. That doesn't mean that I want everybody to be able to come to consensus in society. I want to be very clear that that's not actually my goal. What I want is for everybody to be able to hear a perspective they disagree with and approach that perspective with curiosity.
Awesome. Emmanuel, what do you hope for the future of higher education?
I would hope that there's a consensus on what higher education is. And that requires really good communication skills, interpersonal skills that ensure emotional intelligence is the lens, the augmented lens that we use to look at what students are facing and how we can support them. And I say we because I'm also a staff member at Pasadena City College, and I'm constantly working with students, specifically in that program that helped me so much, which is called CORE, Communities Overcoming Recidivism Through Education. And all that to say is we need to be able to, as educators, read the room. You don't know what students are going through. You don't know if students have had breakfast yet when you're walking into class. And just any other things that they do not share on a regular basis. And if we can get to know who our students are, we could then create a culture, not just on campus, but in the higher educational system, and all of the institutions and organizations that do this work can apply this mindset that teaches a student how to write grants, how to seek floating funds to ultimately fill in those gaps for this illusion of insufficient funding in this country. And I think that's where we have to start.
Amazing. And I can't help but mention, I think some of the work that Emmanuel and his colleagues are doing has really just influenced how we're thinking about what skill building looks like at Campus Combat through our civic agency work, that it does need to really much more deeply translate those types of skills to arm our students, not with just the capacity to make change, but to really pragmatically understand how that looks like. Tania, I want to jump to you next. So throughout these past couple days, there's been a lot of presentations and really incredible thought thinking about storytelling.
Yeah.
I think we've been clear both in the plenaries and even in your remarks today, the challenge point that we are finding ourselves in higher education, the answer is not just, well, if we told the story a little bit better, everybody would get it and we wouldn't be in this place. But there is also the recognition that we have collectively not done a good enough job of talking about how we communicate in different ways about why higher education is a public good. What are your thoughts on that?
I was listening to an interview just the other day where someone was talking about just how terrible higher education is at messaging. And I was thinking just the other day that there's not enough media in this room or at this conference this week in terms of being able to hear the way that so many of our presidents, I want to just thank all of the presidents who've spoken here for your remarks and your leadership, because it has been an incredibly, I think, meaningful to hear you speak so forcefully for what we do and why we do it in a space where it feels like people are afraid to do so. And so thank you for stepping up in these moments to do that. I think when you ask that question, Bobbie, the thing that keeps sticking out to me is this idea that actions speak louder than words. You know, that our responsibility in this moment is to show up and to be present. Now I feel like I'm going to steal from Paul Prebeno's remarks, just sort of show up. What else was it? I know the last one was do the work.
We're going to show up. Pay attention.
Pay attention. That was the second one. Second one. Show up, pay attention, do the work. And so the piece around showing up is that I think we need to lean in to the concerns and the issues that people see in front of them every day, and to show that we are responsive to that in that moment, that we recognize, right, what's happening for folks, and that we turn our attention towards those spaces so that people actually feel the impacts of our institutions in their everyday lives. I think that for too many, higher education feels like that thing over there, as opposed to an active, engaged space in their everyday, right? Where's Carmen? Carmen's out here somewhere talking about being neighborly, right, as part of our efforts, and to recognize ourselves as institutions. We are neighbors, we are members of the communities where our institutions are placed. And so the idea of that separation between the university and the community, the more that we do to blur, to bound, to transgress those boundaries, as artificial as they are, and demonstrate the impacts of us of our institutions in their everyday lives, I think, is one way that we can change how we communicate for the public good. That we show up, that people see us doing the work, people see us in the work, that people see us alongside them in the work. My friend Kathy Cole talks about this work of accompaniment, right? That we do our work alongside and with, as opposed to, you know, the twos, the fours, the overs of it all. But how are we showing up every day in people's lives so that they understand what higher education not only does do but can do when we're working together for the public good?
I want to pull on that thread that you just mentioned around responsiveness. John, you know, as we know, what we have all been working through and facing, you know, particularly over the past 70 some odd days, is not the beginning of really what has been a loss of trust in higher education. You know, this has been declining over time, and last summer, the lowest numbers we've seen on the national polls, but then yet, as we've said here, when people are asked about their local institution, it's always strong. From your perspective, what does it look like to really lean into this? Is responsiveness is that the solution to the loss of trust? What do we do going forward? Like, how do we really begin to do this repair work?
Well, look, it's worth saying that trust in all institutions is down.
Yeah.
Right? People are more skeptical of institutions for a variety of reasons, and higher ed is a part of that. I think in higher ed, we have to acknowledge the parts of the critique that are legitimate. One is, I think your point is exactly right about the need to bridge the gap between communities and institutions. Some of that is about institutions confessing and repenting of their mistreatment of their community, right? And that's hard, right? So that's not just the glossy brochure that says, here are the 5 things we did last year to help the community when we didn't pay any taxes. It's actually acknowledging that many institutions have had an exploitive impact on their surrounding community and haven't been making the kind of contributions they should. So that's one. 2, we haven't always delivered on the value proposition for folks as a sector. When folks don't finish, when they leave school with debt and no degree, that's a terrible situation. In many cases, they are worse off as a result. And we haven't owned that as a sector. Too many students don't finish. We don't provide the supports that we should as a sector. We have work to do there. And so it's understandable why people are mad if that's been their experience of higher education. The third thing I would say, and this goes to Shira's point, is that we have to acknowledge that there has been a lack of genuine intellectual diversity, viewpoint diversity on some campuses. On some campuses, there is a party line view of how one should view issues, and it is very hard to be on that campus and have a different perspective. And that can take a lot of different forms, but we want our campuses to be places of safety and belonging for all students. And so we want a student who's a veteran, a student who is deeply spiritual and committed to their religious faith to feel comfortable, even if that means that they may hold views that are different from others in the campus community. And it also means that academically, in departments, there should be viewpoint diversity. And we haven't been vigilant about that. And so that's a critique that now has taken on, I think, a poisonous, weaponized dimension against higher ed. But we shouldn't have the reaction to dismiss it. We should honestly engage with the critique.
So, Emmanuel, kind of leaning into that, particularly the second thing that John just mentioned about where we have fallen short. And I want to kind of pull on that, which is around this kind of completion and affordability and where we've ensured their student success. And I want to go back to like our very first plenary. We started this conference with hearing from Yolanda Watson-Spiva, Complete College America. From your perspective, Emmanuel, where you're sitting these various institutional roles, where do you see that connective tissue, like at play between workforce development, career readiness, and civic engagement?
Yeah. Well, it's got to be a collaborative partnership that exists in designing what the curriculum is ultimately intended for, or designed for students to learn. Like, what are those SLOs? Are they truly aligning with what employers are seeking? And if they are not, then you got to bring those people into the conversation. One of the things that I notice from the work that we're doing with the Student Design Fellows is that students want to help. Students are starting their own nonprofits so that they can fill in those gaps that they see aren't being met. But because students aren't included in these discussions as well, frequently, educators tend to kind of pat themselves on the back because they're not really seeking their feedback. And as I mentioned earlier, we need to distinguish what higher education is. I recognize it operates as a business. It's intended to generate a workforce that will contribute to the greater good. And as a diesel technician, I had never been so proud of being an American citizen, because I knew that the work that I did ultimately reached you all. All of these trucks need to deliver the products that you all seek, and medication and technology, et cetera. And from that perspective, we need to make sure that we are training people how to contribute to commerce. But we also have to recognize that for some people, this is not just a business. It's not a business at all. It's a civil right. And as someone who studies history, I have come to learn. I've been taught to learn how to debunk things, how to crumble my own biases. And with that, I am able to, like you said, listen to people. And I don't have to agree, but change starts by communicating those different viewpoints. And if there is no consensus of what higher education is intended to do, then we're kind of just fighting each other and not really fulfilling the goal of social mobility.
Shira, in your opening comments, you mentioned in that class around safe spaces and that experience, how that comes up a lot, right? Like about how we also create safe spaces and the importance of safety on multiple levels. How do you think about that alongside civil discourse and dialogue and alongside civic engagement?
This is a hot seat question, and a really important one, so thank you. I think I struggle with the term safety as something that we want to create in atmospheres of discussion across differences. I think there is value in feeling uncomfortable, and there's a question then of like, where is this question keeps coming up at this conference, like where is the line of free speech? Where is the line of comfort and discomfort? And I've been offended enough, mad enough, kind of that seeing red moment where you can't engage anymore. There is kind of an emotional a state of emotional height after which you just can't, productively engage. And so we have to create a way for students to be able to feel emotionally regulated enough to be able to productively engage in a conversation, because if they're not, it's not going to be a productive conversation. But when I think of safety, I wonder if a distinction that might help is whether we're talking about safety from versus safety for. So safety from could be, you can add words at the end, right? Safety from harm, safety from offense. I don't know that we want safety from discomfort. I actually think we want safety for discomfort. I like the framing of for much more than from. I don't know that I don't know that I would independently choose to use the word safety when describing, how I might want to create a space for dialogue. But if I'm going to use the word safety, I'm going to talk about safety for. What do we want to enable and empower students to be able to get out of conversations? We want them to feel safe enough to disagree. We don't want to be safe from disagreement. So when I'm thinking about dialogue, I'm thinking about what conditions we want to set up, how we want to empower our students to feel sufficiently comfortable to engage in the conversation, but not have an expectation that they're going to feel as comfortable as they might feel listening to their favorite song in bed as in a conversation talking about the future of higher education, for example. And so how can we use language that indicates that actually you are going to feel uncomfortable and that learning comes from discomfort? And we don't want you to be seeing red, right? So what are we going to do there? Is a big question. There's a lot of really great research about how we can create that atmosphere. But I caution against using the language of safety because I think it sends the wrong message to students unless we're really, really precise that it's safety for something, safety for discomfort or for, grappling. Then I challenge you to be very precise with your language. What are you actually looking for, and how can you foster that for your students?
Thanks, Shira. John, kind of where we're at today as we talk about all of this work, I'm curious from the various roles that you've held in the past, as we all are reckoning with the reality of the Department of Education and where we stand today and where things may go or really are legally able to move forward. I've appreciated so much of what your voice has meant in this moment. And I just wonder, as we're talking about all of this, as we're talking about what we envision for a future, what do you think is the role, or what is at stake with the kind of current realities of the department and its ability to support, I think about the civil rights conversation, what Emmanuel just said, so I'm curious if you have a perspective on that, you chair.
I mean, the threats are very significant. If you think about what the education department does, it's really 3 buckets of work. One, funding for vulnerable students in K-12, the Title I program that sends funds to schools serving low-income students, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act funding for students with disabilities, funding for English learners. All of that is in jeopardy. Now, folks say, we're going to lay off the people who work on that, but don't worry, we're not going to touch the programs. And you have to decide, do you believe that? Is that a believable argument? And we'll learn more as the budget conversations move forward. But I'm very worried about those programs because they are essential. The second bucket of work is the Pell Grant program and the federal student loan system. That is a very fragile system. It was understaffed and under-resourced before we got to January 20th. And now many of the people who work in those areas have been laid off, and there is a real threat that that system could break down. And if it did, that would be a disaster not only for higher education, but for the economy. At SUNY, almost half of our entering students are Pell Grant eligible. Right? If you take away Pell Grants, many of those students would not be able to go to college. But just having the program not work well, if it's hard to get your FAFSA in, we saw this last year when there were so many technical challenges with the FAFSA. If it's hard to get your student loan information, that can discourage particularly first-generation students from starting or continuing college. And then the third area of work is in the area of civil rights enforcement, data transparency. And again, many of the people who do that work have been laid off. There were more than 20,000 complaints filed with the Office for Civil Rights last year. A significant percentage of them, parents of students with disabilities who weren't getting the services they're entitled to. Who's going to deal with those complaints? Who's going to make sure we have good information about where we're doing well and where we're struggling and how groups of students are performing? So I'm very worried about those threats. Much of what has been done is against the law. And so we've seen the courts step in meaningfully, including on the issue of research dollars for higher education, which is also crucial to the health of our economy and all of our health, right? When there are threats to cut National Institutes of Health funding, that means cuts to Alzheimer's research and cancer research and maternal health disparities research. So the courts have stepped in. We need Congress to step in to defend their constituents. But I think all of us collectively in this moment, part of our civic responsibility is to talk to our friends and neighbors and the people we don't agree with about why education is foundational to the long-term health of the country.
Thank you. So, yeah, absolutely. And we are all so much better for your leadership and your wise voice in this moment. So, so appreciated. Our closing question for everybody on the stage is, if you have a closing comment that you want to make that you've been dying to make based on somebody else on the stage and what they shared, please do. But second, I'd love for you to finish the sentence of higher education is more important than ever because. And Emmanuel, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, so first want to point out, I currently have a similar experience with community engagement and the 2 options offered by my professor to either, do these projects or go into the community and truly implement what we are being taught in class. But to complete the sentence, higher education is more important than ever because the current state of the union reveals social attitudes that remind us how the civil rights movement has yet to end. As a historian, I know that history does not repeat itself, but our work does.
Shira?
One comment that I meant to make around safety is, so I think a lot of folks, if I had to guess, in this room might consider themselves to be Democrats. That's fantastic. I think a lot of the conversations, especially when we're thinking about the language that we use, safety is a term that's alienating to folks on the right. That doesn't feel like what they're necessarily looking for. So when we're talking in this room, like if I said raise your hand if you're in favor of listening to people you disagree with, I imagine all of you would raise your hand, and that's great. But there's a question of until what point? Some of us might disagree on that point. And by the way, if you come to my roundtable later this afternoon, we're going to have a discussion about this, and I'd love to see you there. But what can we do to really bring in those people that we disagree with that may not be in this room right now? You know, where are they? Why didn't they come to this conference if they didn't? If they're here, what might we be saying that's making them feel alienated, and how can we be inclusive of those people that we really, really disagree with? Inclusivity and disagreement are not diametrically opposed. The idea of identity diversity and viewpoint diversity, I really think, are two sides of the same coin, and how can we bring them together in a way that encourages belonging, but that still might make people feel uncomfortable in a way that is productive? And I think that is, higher education may be more important than ever, because that is a goal that we have not yet achieved.
Thank you, Shira.
Thank you. So higher education is more important than ever because bell hooks taught me that it is a tool for liberation, that education is a practice of freedom. We know that the awareness, capacity, and commitments towards liberation of ourselves and towards community thriving can be developed, built, and strengthened through our institutions. And that's the work we should be doing.
I think higher education is more important than ever because it's essential to meeting the greatest challenges we face. Whether we're talking about the threat of climate change and the existential threat that poses to human beings, whether we're talking about growing income inequality, we're talking about the persistence of racism and anti-Semitism and hate, whether we're talking about the threats to our democracy. Higher education is essential to how we overcome those challenges and build a stronger future.
Yes, absolutely. You know, as we wrap up this general session, I think we've talked so much at this conference around why the public mission has never been more important and why the commitment to civic and community engagement is and must be centered as we move forward. And I think what you just said, ending on that, John, that reiterates it, right? Like if higher education is about solving our greatest challenges, and that is on its best day, civic and community engagement is the path to doing that effectively. And it's with scholars like Tania and so many others in this room that we now have we understand how to do this work so much better than we did 40 years ago. And we're gonna do it even better going forward with leaders like Shira and Emmanuel and all of the incredible students here who are going to be centered, at least for as far as Campus Compact can put, not just with a voice at the table, but very much in a place of leadership. So we are about ready to wrap this final plenary session, and I had the blessing of starting this conference with a lot of thank yous, and I have a few as we wrap up. I first want to thank our sponsors, and a real just round of applause for all of them that have committed to being here and making this possible. I want to copycat Tania. I will say, I have been so inspired and thankful, and I just have never felt so lucky to get to work with the Campus Compact board members who you got to see speak. So Mary and Paul and Havadan and Susan, who all stood up and spoke throughout this conference, and then John today, I do think when there's such, there's a narrative of lack of courage, and there's a narrative of where is higher education leadership. And what this conference showed is at the very top of our institutions with our presidents and chancellors, that is just false. That we have leaders, particularly in Campus Compact, who are saying the hard things, who are speaking and holding on to our values. So just a round of applause for our presidents that are here and all the presidents on your campuses. And finally, perhaps my favorite thank you is to all the people in the orange shirts, many of which are in the back of the room, our student design fellows up front, who have made this experience so exceptional, and who have been up early and here late. And I know everybody here has benefited from just the incredible work that the entire Campus Compact team and our student design fellows who have been with us along this ride really committed to this conference. So thank you all. And it would not be fair to single out two folks who went particularly above and beyond. So Caitlin Radigan and Molly Leeper, who's one of our ABUs in the back. Caitlin and Molly. And we have two more incredible concurrent sessions. Shira has done a phenomenal job of pitching her session. And then the student design fellows have an awesome workshop as well. There is a lot of rich content still to be had. And as my colleague Matt said yesterday, please remember this is how we show up for our colleagues. So the room is really packed, which is great on a final day like this of a conference. So there's two more concurrent session blocks. The next one starts at 10:30. And as we wrap, I do want to invite you to join us next March in Chicago, Illinois for Compact 26. Thank you all. Travel safe.